everyone. This is Outnumbered. I'm Emily Campagno, and joining me today, Fox News Sunday anchor and chief legal correspondent Shannon Bream, Fox News contributor and president of American Spirit Enterprises Tammy Bruce, Fox News contributor and host of Tomi Lahren is Fearless on Outkick, Tomi Lahren, and Fox News contributor and Fox Nation host Tom Shalhoub. Now we begin with the 2024 presidential race and why working class Joe is losing the working class vote and potentially the White House. Last night, President Biden joined former Presidents Obama and Clinton at a lavish, star-studded campaign event at Radio City Music Hall. Stephen Colbert hosted, Lizzo sang, and for a mere $100,000 donation to Biden's re-election campaign, you got a photo with Biden and his predecessors. Tickets ranged up to $500 million a pop. That is a lot of cash to fund ads telling regular Americans that Joe's fighting for them.
He grew up a middle-class kid in a middle-class town. And while Joe Biden's traveled far and wide, Scranton, Pennsylvania has never left him. He knows what life is like for working people and knows middle-class life is too expensive right now.
But to President Biden, the glitzy event was a, quote, grassroots fundraiser. Well, that grassroots fundraiser raked in more than $26 million. And of course, they couldn't resist taking shots at former President Trump.
My question to you, sir, can voters trust a presidential candidate who has not won a single Trump International Golf Club trophy? At long last, sir, have you no chip shot?
Well, look, I'd be happy to play. I told him once before when he came into the Oval, when he was before he got sworn in, I said, I'll give you 3 strokes if you carry your own bag.
Yeah, worth every cent. And while they laughed it up, Trump was on Long Island, attending the wake of murdered NYPD officer Jonathan Diller.
What happened is such a sad event, such a horrible thing, and it's happening all too often, and we're just not going to let it happen. We just can't. Maybe something is going to be learned. We've got to toughen it up. We've got to strengthen it up. This should never be allowed.
Critics are pointing out the stark contrast between the two scenes and Democrats' growing disconnect from working class voters. The New York Post editorial board writing, quote, reveling in decadence while a cop family mourns. And Americans pinch pennies. Yeah, sure exposes Biden's true base. Trendy liberals in the highest income brackets. At last February's Democratic National Committee meeting, Biden groaned that many blue-collar workers had fled to the Republican Party. Well, they write, can't imagine why. Shannon Bream, a really powerful contrast, but at its root, it's frankly heartbreaking, that contrast.
Mm-hmm. It is. And listen, campaigns now cost about $1 billion, we know, to run for president on either side of the ticket. So fundraising has to be done. The Trump campaign, though, is happy that this optic is what's coming out of yesterday, is that while that fundraising was being done, the former president is there with law enforcement members, with a grieving family, a grieving widow. He's going to have his own big fundraiser down in Mar-a-Lago this week, and they're hoping to eclipse the number that came out of Radio City Music Hall last night. But the fact is, President Trump is one of the mysteries, I think, of modern day politics in that he is a billionaire. He flies around in a private jet, and yet everyday Americans feel like he sees them, he hears them, he stands with law enforcement. He's managed to build those relationships and convince people, I'm here for you, and they see that as a very genuine thing.
Absolutely. Tommy, talk to me about what this illustration, the impact it will have on all of those Americans who feel heard by Trump and who stand in their grieving alongside the blue community here in New York.
Well, I'll also say this. The fact that Joe Biden didn't change his plans to make an appearance knowing that Donald Trump was going to be there, to me, that's pretty brazen. You have the opportunity to show up, even if you are just doing it for optics, and he chose not to. So, again, I don't know who runs his campaign. I think they're doing a horrible job optically. But I'll also say this. To your point, Shannon, about Donald Trump, I come from South Dakota. I come from Middle America. The thing that people in middle America love about Donald Trump and always have is that he comes as he is. He doesn't try to wear blue jeans and cowboy boots and try to be one of us, but he still is one of us, and that he cares about us and he cares about the forgotten Americans. He doesn't have to pretend to be one. He doesn't have to pretend to understand the plight of the smaller folks out there, but he can still resonate with them because he cares about them from a very genuine place. And that was proven again yesterday when he stands with the law enforcement community. You can see how much he truly cares. It's not feigned. It's not for optics. And they wanted him there, which I think even speaks more to how much the law enforcement community appreciates that man.
Tammy, I remember the exit polls in Iowa when, of those who had voted for President Trump, the number one reason they stated for doing so is because he fights for people like me. And that, again, stands in stark contrast to what message do you think the Democrats are sending when they say, I stand with you if you pay $100,000.
Right, and that's an issue, just like we know immigration now is the number one issue for voters, but also always in every election is, does this person care about people like me, right? It's an issue of empathy. And that has always been then the discussion. But the difference between a billionaire and a cop or an unemployed person or a stay-at-home mom, that's the American story, is that it doesn't matter who you are or how much money you have. It's the differences in all of our lives sitting here is that we relate to each other. We're in the same kind of fight for living a dream that is really up to us and a system that is supposed to leave us alone in the process of that. So you can have empathy whether if you're poor or if you're rich or if you're a politician or not. That's the nature of who we are as human beings. I mean, especially we've got the holiday weekend coming up. It's really about love and embracement and the future and what we mean to each other. Last night, you didn't have to plan it when it comes to optics. It was it was so honest on both sides. The most honest scene you're going to see about the Republicans and the Democrats. The difference between Trump, genuine empathy. He was asked because they knew the Radio City Music Hall. Of course, they were not going to change it because that's who they are. They're not over there. You don't touch that. Donald Trump goes there because he's as much them as he is his own billionaire friends.
So let me ask you, Tom, they raised $26 million last night. Will that matter if the working class has fled to, rightly so, a party that listens and cares?
Great question, because I was looking at the ad and I was thinking, that's really an effective ad, showing Joe Biden, old lunch pack Joe, and you look at him and you think, oh, I guess he did look like that at one time. I guess he did hang out with those guys at one time. So the ad would be effective, but I don't think these kind of ads are effective anymore. I don't think this heartstrings, it's morning in America, that stuff did work in the 1980s. Now people are they're not paying as much attention to that. People used to sit around and watch network TV, and when that network ad came on, you thought, oh, wow, maybe I'll give this guy a shot. We don't look at that media anymore, and we're tired of being manipulated by media. We know what's going on in the world. And to the point of this empathy, and remember Bill Clinton was I feel your pain. Remember that? They always said that, I feel your pain. We know Trump doesn't feel our pain. These guys, the Joe Lunchpack, the cop, the construction worker, I talk to these guys all the time. I love talking to blue-collar guys. And you know what they're talking about now? They're talking about how it's worse in this country. They think Trump loves the country. That's what they care about, not about their personal pain. They don't want someone to feel their pain. They want someone to make the country better. And so that's why. And when you say in 2016, a lot of these blue-collar guys said, hey, I'm going to give this guy a shot. Hey, Trump, I know he's rough around the edges. I'm going to give him a shot. Now he's a known quantity. Now they're not talking to me. These blue-collar guys, they're not talking about Trump. They're talking about how they think Biden is ruining their country. They're talking about Biden. In 2016, they weren't even talking about Hillary. They were talking about Trump. They were saying, like, hey, this guy's got something. Now it's not about Trump, I think, his personality. It's about the country for them now.
That's right. And, I'm only one voter and I'm only one New Yorker that lives here. But when I think of last night, because I walked right by Radio City, I walked by those presidents, I will remember I will remember President Trump standing alongside the Diller community and NYPD.